So let's look at your overview of export efforts for Nigeria's agri sector.
Okay, so look, from my perspective, I would give the government's efforts in agricultural production a focus on the sector, unlocking capital for those who want to play in the sector, exciting the area in their efforts to diversify the economy. I would give them an overall pass mark. I think that the effort, even though some of the results are not being seen or are creating problems in other areas in the economy, the effort in itself is generating what I would consider to be good results by the government.
Now, the value of exports in terms of Naira is been put at about 1.7 trillion Naira as at December of last year. And talks by the government at the moment are hinged essentially on how to move the economy forward using the agri sector. Shall we take a moment to look at the regulations that are supporting production first before we move to exports?
Okay, great. I think in terms of regulations, I think there's still some way to go. One of the critical things about the agri sector, about food production in general, is that you have to have standards. You have to be able to standardize what you're producing. You have to standardize in terms of how it looks, in terms of how it tastes, in terms of how it's produced, even some of the non-visible pieces of work that you have to do behind the scenes. I think there's a great deal of work to be done in that standardization. Unless you standardize, you cannot scale. People like to know what they're getting, whether they're buying it in the local market or they're buying it on the international market. So I think from a regulatory perspective, I think standardization is probably the bit that we are lagging behind on. In terms of unlocking capital, in terms of providing land, in terms of providing expertise, and support from what I would call the donor community, and whether that's financial donations or just expertise from abroad, I think there's been a great deal of progress made in that area, and that in itself is going to impact policy.
So let's look at bottlenecks to standardization. You have highlighted that when you just finished talking now. I'm looking at a situation where some exporters are asking the federal government to slash quarantine on farm produce, talking about the cost of exporting cargo. That's a point of controversy now. So what bottlenecks might there be working against efforts at standardization of export produce?
Okay, so essentially your question is around the standardization of the process. Now, the process in itself has many bottlenecks. Okay, one obviously is infrastructure. The road network is probably inadequate, considering the distance. Probably inadequate. Let me give the government some credit. They're trying to make some effort in that direction. But it is inadequate. It's never enough. You always have to improve road infrastructure. Rail, I know there's a lot of work going on around that. And of course, there's quite a bit of barge movements going on of containers as well. However, if you look at the port itself, the port gate is a funnel. There are far too many trucks coming in from the north, going into the port. That can be taken away. You can put inland container terminals so that the trucks that are coming in from the far north don't have to come all the way to Apapa. They can actually pick up the cargo from an inland terminal that is serviced by some sort of rail or other forms of transport that automatically, in a bonded way, take the containers or the cargo to that inland terminal. So you have the funnel at the port. You also have a situation with the terminals, which is really interesting, and where there is an unseen bottleneck, perhaps. And this is the issue. For the exporters, for the shipping companies, for the terminal managers, they don't make any money from sitting on containers that are going out. Okay. The minute they receive containers from offshore, demurrage can kick in and they can start to recognize revenue. Therefore, it is natural that there will be some sort of bias.
So when you said earlier unseen bottlenecks, yeah, I thought in-your-face bottlenecks.
Right.
Especially when you consider the fact that the Apapa gridlock has been like in-your-face hot topic in the news, logistics regarding movement of goods out of the ports now. Now the one that concerns agri-seeds especially is that of exporters lamenting trapped commodities within some of those containers inside Apapa, especially the one of the cashew nuts valued to be at about $3 million bound for Vietnam. There are still trapped there. Sure.
Okay, so look, the agri sector has a very special problem. And the problem they've got, particularly with cashew, is that unlike wood, unlike copper, that is a perishable commodity. If it stays in the port for a day, for a minute longer than it should do, then what you're going to get is a devaluation in the quality of that product. And that, therefore, there's going to be a devaluation in its price. its end sale price. Also, the recipients are expecting it to arrive at a particular day, at a particular time. If it doesn't arrive, it begins to affect their own supply chain. So the agri-tech sector, unlike the mineral sector, unlike the wood sector, have a special issue around the perishability of their goods.
You cited earlier issues that could come from having to move goods from, say, maybe the north side of the country to the eastern side and other regions within the country. Now, that just reminded me that the Agri Minister, and you smile when I talk about this, has announced that the country plans to establish 4 cashew processing plants. So there is a need for those plants, based on what you've just said, but in 4 different parts of the Federation.
Sure.
And that just takes us back to the logistical challenges of moving these products around the country and out of the country.
Sure. Okay, so 4 different parts of the country, that may be a political decision. Okay, generally speaking, in this country, you make decisions based usually on sort of geopolitical equanimity. Okay, so that may be the reason for that. That in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you have the processing plants near the zones where the products are being produced. Okay, so what you don't want to do is produce raw material or first-grade produce in one place and then truck it across the country to another place to have it processed, because that comes with special issues of its own. If you have, as I know that the government had looked at staple crop processing zones, and you have the processing going on where the commodity is being produced, that's not an issue. Okay. But, in terms of the fact that these processing plants are even being considered, it's a good thing. It has 2 impacts. One, it prolongs the shelf life of the product, okay, because once you've processed, then you immediately take away the risk of spoilage within a very tight time frame. The second thing is that you add value. So your export, if you end up exporting, or even if you sell it to a local market, you end up selling for more, which is good for the farmer. The farmer can put more back onto their farms. So
Akintunde, we are hoping that in view of the government plans to boost the economy through agri, there will be more incentives for exports of agri produce out of the country. Thank you very much for your time and thoughts on the show this